The excavator's steel teeth bit into concrete as Karen's voice shattered the morning air, a scream that would haunt the neighborhood forever. But as her precious children tumbled into the very hole they'd secretly been digging for weeks, I realized that sometimes karma doesn't wait for an invitation. It just shows up with a shovel and starts digging graves for the entitled. The first crack in my pool appeared on a Tuesday morning in late September, a hairline fracture that ran along the deep end like a scar across smooth skin. I knelt beside it, running my fingers along the concrete, feeling the rough edges where water pressure had finally won its war against time. 23 years, I muttered, watching the early morning light dance across the still water. 23 years since Sarah and I had saved every penny to build this backyard oasis. 23 years of birthday parties, lazy summer afternoons, and quiet evening swims after long days at the accounting firm. Now Sarah was gone, taken by cancer 8 months ago, and the pool felt more like a monument to loneliness than joy. The insurance adjuster had been clear, the foundation had shifted, the filtration system was shot, and the cost to repair exceeded the pool's value. Tear it down and start fresh, or fill it in, he'd said with practiced indifference. Those are your options. I chose neither. I chose removal, complete excavation and restoration of the yard Sarah had dreamed of turning into a garden. She'd sketched plans on napkins during her final weeks, talking about heirloom tomatoes and rose bushes while morphine dulled the pain. The least I could do was make that dream real. The excavation crew was scheduled to arrive Monday morning. I spent the weekend draining the pool, the submersible pump working overtime to empty decades of memories along with 30,000 gallons of chlorinated water. Sunday evening, as I coiled the last of the pool equipment in the garage, a shadow fell across my driveway. What the hell do you think you're doing? I turned to find Karen Pemberton standing at the edge of my property, her artificially widened teeth gleaming in a snarl. Designer yoga pants stretched over her surgically enhanced frame, and her bleached hair was pulled back in the kind of aggressive ponytail that meant business. Karen lived 3 houses down in a McMansion that dominated its lot like a suburban fortress. We'd had exactly 2 conversations in the 5 years since she'd moved in, once when she'd complained about my Christmas lights being aggressively festive, and once when she'd demanded I trim my oak tree because it was dropping leaves in her pristine backyard. Removing my pool, I said, turning back to my work. Problem? Yes, there's a problem. Her voice climbed an octave. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to our property values? I straightened slowly, my back protesting. After hours of manual labor. It's my property, Karen. Property that affects the entire neighborhood. She gestured wildly toward her house. We moved here specifically for the aesthetic. The mature landscaping, the established feel. And now you want to turn your yard into a what? A construction site. A garden, I said quietly. My wife wanted a garden. Karen's expression didn't soften. If anything, her eyes grew harder. Your wife is dead, James. And the living have to deal with the consequences of your sentimental nonsense. The words hit like a physical blow. I felt my hands clench into fists, felt the familiar rage that had been my constant companion since Sarah's funeral. But I also felt something else, a cold clarity that settled over me like armor. Get off my property. I'll call the city, Karen continued, apparently immune to social cues. There have to be permits for this kind of thing. Environmental impact studies. I'll bet you don't have half the paperwork you need. I have everything I need. I pulled out my phone and showed her the digital copies of my permits. Removal permit, environmental clearance, utility marking verification. All approved and paid for. Her face flushed red. Then I'll call a lawyer. There are noise ordinances. Property line restrictions, the excavation starts at 8 a.m. tomorrow, I cut her off. City ordinance allows construction between 8 and 6 on weekdays. The crew estimates 3 days for complete removal and backfill. 3 days of that machine tearing up the neighborhood. 3 days, I repeated. And then it's done. Karen's perfectly manicured finger stabbed toward my face. This isn't over, James. You think you can just do whatever you want because everyone feels sorry for the widower? Well, let me tell you. Something, grief doesn't give you the right to destroy other people's investments. She spun on her designer heel and stalked away, her phone already pressed to her ear. I could hear fragments of her conversation drifting back across the evening air. Completely unreasonable. Property values a lawyer. I went inside and poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, Sarah's favorite, though she'd only had a glass on special occasions. The bottle was still nearly full, another monument to all the celebrations we'd never have. Monday morning arrived grey and humid, the kind of weather that promised storms later in the day. The excavation crew showed up precisely at 8, led by a weathered man named Miguel who'd run his own business for 15 years. Nice clean job, he said, walking the perimeter of the pool. Shouldn't be any surprises. We'll have the concrete broken up by noon, debris hauled by Wednesday morning. You want us to bring in topsoil? 2 yards, I said. Good stuff. My wife wanted to plant vegetables. Miguel nodded with the quiet respect that working men show for other people's grief. We'll take care of you. The excavator was a yellow beast, all hydraulic power and diesel thunder. As Miguel fired it up, I noticed Karen's curtains twitch. In her front window. She'd been watching, waiting. The first bite into the concrete sent vibrations through the ground. Birds scattered from nearby trees, and somewhere in the distance, a dog began to bark. But there was something satisfying about the destruction, something therapeutic in watching the physical remnants of my former life reduced to rubble. By 10 a.m., half the pool was gone. That's when Karen appeared at my front door. James. She pounded on the wood hard enough to rattle the hinges. James. I opened the door to find her wild-eyed and trembling with rage. Behind her, 2 kids, her twins, Mason and Madison, maybe 10 years old, stood on my lawn like witnesses to their mother's fury. You have to stop this immediately. Why? The noise. The dust. The destruction. She gestured toward the excavator like it was spewing toxic waste instead of demolishing concrete. My children can't concentrate on their studies. I glanced at the kids, both clutching tablets and wearing noise-canceling headphones. Looks like they're managing. This is harassment, Karen snarled. Intentional destruction of the neighborhoods. Character. I've already called Channel 7 News. They are sending a reporter. To cover a pool removal. To expose your vindictive campaign against families just trying to maintain their quality of life. The excavator's engine revved as Miguel maneuvered around the deep end. Chunks of concrete crashed into the growing pile of debris, each impact punctuated by Karen's increasingly shrill complaints. I'm calling the police, she declared. For what crime? Disturbing the peace. Destruction of property values. Something. She spun toward her children. Mason, Madison, come on. We are going to Grandma's until this monster is finished destroying our neighborhood. As she herded the kids toward her oversized SUV, I noticed something strange. The twins kept looking back at the excavation site, but not with the expression of children fleeing a disturbance. They looked disappointed. Almost guilty. The rest of Monday passed without incident. Miguel and his crew worked with methodical efficiency, breaking up concrete and loading it into a dump truck. By evening, the pool was nothing but a gaping hole surrounded by neat piles of debris. Tuesday morning brought rain, a steady drizzle that turned the exposed earth into slick mud. Miguel covered the excavator and sent his crew home early. Tomorrow we finish up, he told me. Weather should clear by afternoon. I spent the rainy day sorting through Sarah's gardening books, planning the layout she'd sketched in her final weeks. Heirloom tomatoes along the south fence. Herbs in raised beds near the kitchen window. A memorial rose bush where the deep end used to be. Wednesday dawned clear and bright. Miguel arrived early, eager to finish the job before the next storm system moved through. As the excavator roared to life, I noticed Karen's SUV was back in her driveway. The twins were in the front yard, watching the work with fascination despite their mother's apparent horror. The final cleanup went faster than expected. By noon, the last of the concrete was loaded and hauled away. Miguel was preparing to begin backfill when he shut off the excavator and climbed down with a puzzled expression. "Mr. James," he called, "you'd better come look at this." I walked to the edge of what had been my pool. The excavation was complete, revealing not just the expected cavity but something else, a tunnel. A narrow passage that had been hidden beneath the pool's deep end, now exposed like a secret finally brought to light. "That wasn't on any of the utility maps," Miguel said, crouching beside the opening. "Looks like someone's been digging." The tunnel was maybe 3 feet in diameter, shored up with stolen lumber and extending toward the property line. Toward Karen's house. Fresh tool marks scored the walls and I could smell the earthy scent of recent excavatio. The sound of Karen's pool deck collapsing was like thunder rolling through the earth, a deep, grinding roar punctuated by the sharp crack of splitting concrete and the splash of 30,000 gallons finding new places to go. Water cascaded into the growing sinkhole, carrying with it pieces of Karen's carefully curated outdoor paradise, the imported Italian tiles, the stainless steel barbecue island, the meditation fountain she'd installed to promote wellness and property values. "Jesus Christ," Miguel breathed, backing away from the edge of my property as the destruction accelerated. "The whole tunnel system is caving in." Karen stood paralyzed, watching her backyard transform into something resembling a construction disaster. The outdoor sound system, a $5,000 Bose installation she'd bragged about at the last Homeowners Association meeting, disappeared into the churning water with a final electronic squeal. "This isn't happening," she whispered. "This can't be happening." The code enforcement officer was already on his radio, calling for additional units. "We are going to need the city engineer out here," he said. "And probably the fire department. This could affect the foundation of the house." At those words, Karen's paralysis shattered like glass. "The house?" Her voice cracked on a register that probably sent dogs running for miles. "What do you mean the house?" When you excavate under a structure without proper supports, you risk undermining the foundation. Depending on how far this tunnel system extends, he didn't get to finish. Karen was already sprinting toward her McMansion, her designer yoga pants now streaked with mud and her perfect ponytail whipping behind her like a battle flag. The twins, still huddled by my oak tree, watched their mothers retreat with her. Wide-eyed confusion of children whose world had just tilted off its axis. "Should we follow her?" Mason asked, his voice small and uncertain. I looked at the two kids, really looked at them for the first time. They were thin, pale children with the kind of nervous energy that comes from living with constant parental pressure. Madison had dirt under her fingernails from weeks of tunnel digging, and Mason wore the hollow expression of a boy who just realized his treasure hunt had been a lie. "Stay here for now," I told them gently. "Your mom needs a minute to process things." Miguel was walking the perimeter of the collapse, taking pictures with his phone. "This is bad," he said. "Really bad. The tunnel went at least 60 feet from your pool toward her house. Without proper shoring, the whole thing was basically a time bomb waiting to go off." The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had spent months orchestrating the destruction of my pool, only to trigger the catastrophic failure of her own backyard. It was like watching karma operate with surgical precision. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached our quiet suburban street. Within minutes, my formerly peaceful cul-de-sac looked like the scene of a natural disaster. Fire trucks, police cars, and a city engineering van filled the street while neighbors emerged from their houses to gawk at the chaos. The fire chief, a veteran named Captain Rodriguez, surveyed the damage with professional detachment. "We need to evacuate the house immediately," he told the code enforcement officer. "That sinkhole is still expanding, and there's no way to know how much of the foundation has been compromised." Evacuate. Karen's voice drifted across the yard as she emerged from her house carrying a designer handbag and a laptop. "For how long?" "Until a structural engineer can assess the damage," Rodriguez replied. "Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on what we find when we get the water pumped out and can see the full extent of the excavation." Karen's face went through several color changes, from pale to red to a sickly gray-green. "Weeks. But we have, this is our home." With respect, this stopped being a safe home the moment someone started digging unauthorized tunnels under the foundation. The twins crept closer to me, instinctively seeking stability as their world continued to crumble. Madison tugged on my sleeve. "Mr. James? Are we going to be homeless?" The question hit me harder than it should have. Whatever Karen had done, these kids were innocent victims of their mother's schemes. They'd been manipulated into thinking they were helping solve a problem, not creating a catastrophe. "You're not homeless," I said. "Your mom will figure something out." But even as I said it, I could see Karen's panic escalating. She was pacing back and forth in front of the fire trucks, gesticulating wildly as she spoke rapid fire into her cell phone. Fragments of her conversation drifted across the chaos. Insurance won't cover. Unauthorized. Property values. Lawsuit. Detective Sarah Chen arrived 20 minutes later, her unmarked sedan sliding between the fire trucks. With practiced ease. She was a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a manner that suggested she'd seen every variation of human stupidity at least twice. "So," she said, surveying the scene, "someone want to explain how we went from a routine pool removal to a sinkhole evacuation?" The code enforcement officer filled her in while she took notes, occasionally glancing at the twins, who were now sitting on my front steps like refugees from their own lives. When he finished, she walked over to examine the filled-in excavation, where my pool had been. "This tunnel system," she said. "How long was it under construction?" "The kids said months," I replied. "Based on the amount of dirt they moved and the quality of the shoring, I'd guess they've been working on it since spring." "And the mother, Karen Pemberton, she supervised this excavation. According to Mason and Madison, she told them it was a treasure hunt to find broken pipes that were causing high water bills." Detective Chen's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something cold in her eyes. She'd probably seen parents use their children in worse schemes, but that didn't make this one any less reprehensible. "I'll need to interview the children separately," she said. "And Mrs. Pemberton, once she's done with her crisis management." Karen was still on the phone, but her voice had dropped from panic to something that sounded suspiciously like calculation. She'd moved away from the immediate disaster area and was now standing beside her SUV, speaking in urgent whispers. "Completely his fault. Property line dispute. Children were just playing. Need the best lawyer you can find." Miguel finished securing his equipment and approached me with a grim expression. "I'm real sorry about this, Mr. James. In 30 years of excavation work, I've never seen anything like it." "Not your fault," I said. "You did exactly what I hired you to do." "Still feels wrong, though. Your wife's garden project turning into this." He gestured toward the chaos consuming the neighborhood. I looked at the neat rectangle of backfilled earth where my pool had been just hours ago. In a few days, once the investigation was complete and the authorities were satisfied, I could start preparing the soil for planting. Sarah's dream garden would still happen, despite Karen's sabotage. Maybe because of Karen's sabotage. "Actually," I said, "I think Sarah would have found this funny." Miguel raised an eyebrow. "She always said that karma was just the universe's way of keeping score. And the universe, apparently, has a sense of humor about entitled neighbors." Before Miguel could respond, a new commotion erupted from Karen's direction. She'd finished her phone call and was now marching toward Detective Chen with the determined stride of someone who'd convinced herself she was the victim in this scenario. "Officer," she called out, "I want to press charges." I'm Detective Chen. And yes, charges will likely be filed. But first, against him." Karen pointed at me with a perfectly manicured finger. "James Morrison deliberately destroyed my property. This whole pool removal was a vindictive attack designed to damage my home." The detective's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see the twins exchanging worried glances on my front steps. Even at 10 years old, they understood that their mother was digging herself into a deeper hole than the one that had just swallowed her backyard. "Mrs. Pemberton," Detective Chen said calmly, "are you claiming that Mr. Morrison somehow caused your children to excavate an unauthorized tunnel under his property?" He must have known. The ground conditions, the geological instability. He deliberately removed his pool knowing it would cause my property to collapse. "So you're saying he used his psychic powers to predict that your secret tunnel would fail when he legally removed a structure from his own property with all proper permits?" Karen's mouth opened and closed several times, like a fish gasping for air. "That's not. I didn't say. The tunnel wasn't." "Mrs. Pemberton," the detective continued, Your children have already explained how you organized and supervised the excavation of an unauthorized tunnel under your neighbor's property. They described months of digging, during which you told them they were looking for broken pipes that were affecting your utility bills. Is that accurate? They are children. They don't understand complex property issues. Complex property issues that required them to crawl through underground tunnels to access someone else's plumbing. Madison stood up from the steps, her young face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Mom, why are you lying? You showed us exactly where to dig. You gave us the tools and the flashlights. You said it was our secret project and that would be heroes for saving EV. The moment of apparent remorse lasted exactly 12 seconds. I know because I was counting, watching Karen's face cycle through what looked like genuine regret before hardening back into the familiar mask of entitlement and blame. But you have to understand, she continued, her voice gaining strength as she rebuilt her defenses, I was protecting my family. My children's future. Their college funds are tied up in this house, their entire stability depends on maintaining property values. In this neighborhood. Detective Chen looked up from her notepad with the weary expression of someone who'd heard every variation of this song before. Mrs. Pemberton, you do realize that your actions have likely destroyed far more value than any imaginary pool-related depreciation. That's not or this wasn't supposed to happen. Karen gestured helplessly at the sinkhole that had consumed her backyard. The tunnel was supposed to prove that James was stealing our utilities. Once we had proof, we could force him to either fix his pool properly or fill it in like a responsible neighbor. By we, you mean your 10-year-old children crawling through an unsafe excavation for months. They volunteered. They were excited to help solve the mystery. Madison wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her cheek. Mom, you said if we didn't help, our family would lose all our money because of Mr. James's broken pool. And you said, Mason added, that if we told anyone before we found proof, Mr. James might hide the evidence and would never be able to prove he was stealing from us. The twins' words hung in the humid air like accusations. Around us, the controlled chaos of the emergency response continued, fire department personnel setting up pumps to drain the sinkhole, the city engineer taking measurements, neighbors clustering in small groups to discuss the unfolding disaster. But in our small circle, the real drama was just beginning. Mrs. Pemberton, Detective Chen said, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. Your children have described systematic child endangerment spanning several months. You had them performing manual labor in hazardous conditions based on a completely fabricated premise. Fabricated? Karen's voice climbed toward hysteria again. His pool was green and disgusting. It was breeding mosquitoes and driving down everyone's property values, none of which justified illegal excavation under his property. But the utility theft, there was no utility theft, the city engineer interrupted, looking up from his clipboard. I've been reviewing the municipal records. Mr. Morrison's property has separate water, electric, and gas meters. There's no physical way his pool could have affected your bills. The statement landed like a physical blow. Karen's face went through several color changes as the implication sank in. That's impossible. My bills doubled after they installed that pool system. 23 years ago, I pointed out. Before you even moved to the neighborhood. But the timing, the correlation. The engineer continued gently, I pulled 5 years of billing records for your address. Your utilities have been consistent within normal seasonal variations. There's been no unusual spike that would indicate any kind of service theft. Karen stared at him as if he'd just announced that gravity had been repealed. But the numbers don't lie. I have spreadsheets. Calculations. Proof that something was wrong. Detective Chen's pen moved across her notepad. Mrs. Pemberton, are you saying you have documentation that led you to believe Mr. Morrison was stealing utilities? Yes. Absolutely. I can show you. Karen fumbled with her phone, scrolling through what looked like dozens of photos and documents. Look at this electricity bill from March. Then April. Then May. The pattern is clear. She thrust the phone toward Detective Chen, who examined the screen with professional patience. After a moment, she looked up with an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and deeply concerned. Mrs. Pemberton, these bills show normal usage patterns for a 4,000 square foot house with a heated pool, central air conditioning, and extensive outdoor lighting. But they are so much higher than they should be. Based on what comparison? Karen's mouth opened and closed several times. Based on what's reasonable? What's fair? We moved here from a smaller house and the bills were much lower there. The engineer consulted his tablet. Your previous address was a 1,200 square foot townhouse with no pool, minimal outdoor space, and shared utilities for heating and cooling. Did you expect the same usage rates? The question seemed to break something fundamental in Karen's worldview. She looked around the circle of faces, detective, engineer, fire chief, neighbors, as if seeking someone who would validate her delusions. But someone has to be responsible, she said, her voice small and confused. Numbers don't just increase. There has to be a reason. A person to blame. Madison tugged on her mother's mud-stained yoga pants. Mom, remember when you showed us the bills from our old house? You said we needed to be more careful because big houses cost more money. That was different, Karen snapped. That was before I realized someone was stealing from us. Stealing what? Mason asked with the brutal honesty of childhood. The man said our meters are separate. How could Mr. James steal our electricity? Karen looked down at her son as if he'd betrayed her. You don't understand the complexity of utility systems. There are ways of connections, underground infrastructure. Mom, Madison said quietly, I think maybe there was no stealing. The admission came from a 10-year-old girl covered in dirt, standing in the ruins of her backyard, watching her mother struggle to maintain a fantasy that had destroyed their home. It was simultaneously heartbreaking and profound, a child's ability to accept reality when adults refuse to. Karen's face crumpled. For a moment, I thought she might finally acknowledge the truth, might take responsibility for the chaos she'd created. Instead, she turned on me with renewed fury. This is your fault, she snarled. All of it. If you'd just maintained your property properly, if you'd shown some consideration for the people who have to live near you, none of this would have happened. Karen, don't Karen me. You let that pool rot for months after Sarah died. Months. Do you know what it's like to look out your window and see a monument to death every single day? The words cut deep, but not in the way she intended. Because suddenly I understood something I'd missed during all the months of grief and isolation. You're right, I said quietly. Everyone stared at me, Detective Chen, the twins, Karen herself. The admission seemed to shock them more than her accusations had. I did let the pool go, I continued. After Sarah died, I couldn't bear to maintain it. Every time I looked at it, I saw her doing laps in the morning, or hosting the kids' birthday parties, or just floating on her back reading mysteries on Sunday afternoons. Karen's expression shifted, uncertainty replacing anger. So I let it turn green, I said. I let the leaves collect and the chemistry go to hell because it was easier than dealing with the memories. And you're right, it probably did affect property values. It definitely affected the neighborhood's appearance. Then you admit, I admit that grief made me a bad neighbor for a while. But that doesn't justify what you did to your children. The distinction hung in the air like a line drawn in sand. Karen had expected me to accept blame for her actions, to provide a target for all the guilt and fear she couldn't handle. Instead, I'd acknowledged my failures while leaving hers fully exposed. Captain Rodriguez approached with a status update. Detective, we've got the immediate area secured, but we are going to need Mrs. Pemberton and her children out of the house until the structural assessment is complete. Do you have somewhere to stay? Karen looked around wildly, as if the question had never occurred to her. My mother lives in Tampa, but she's in assisted living now. My sister is in Seattle, but we haven't spoken in years. What? About hotels? Detective Chen suggested. For 6 months. Do you have any idea what that would cost? Karen's voice climbed toward panic again. My husband is traveling for business. He won't be back until next week. I don't even know how to explain this to him. The twins exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that develops between siblings who've learned to navigate unstable parents together. Maybe we could stay with Grandma Ellen, Madison suggested. She's always saying her apartment is too quiet. Grandma Ellen's facility doesn't allow children for more than short visits, Karen said absently. Insurance liability or something. What about Dad's brother in Orlando? Mason tried. Uncle Rick barely tolerates us for Christmas dinner. I'm not subjecting him to a 6-month houseguest situation. I watched this family inventory play out and realized something that probably should have occurred to me earlier. Karen Pemberton, for all her aggressive confidence and suburban status displays, was fundamentally isolated. She'd moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago and made exactly 0 friends. She'd alienated her extended family with her demands and criticism. She'd built a beautiful house and filled it with expensive things, but she'd never built a community. Now, when she needed help most, she had nowhere to turn. The irony was almost painful. Here was a woman who'd spent months obsessing over property values and neighborhood aesthetics, only to discover that she'd never invested in the relationships that make a nag. I stared at the text message for a full minute, reading it 3 times before the implications fully sank in. Karen Pemberton, facing criminal charges and the loss of her children, had decided that I was still the villain in her story. Even from a holding cell, she was plotting revenge. My hands were shaking as I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Detective Chen. Her response came back within minutes, on our way. Don't go anywhere alone. The next few hours passed in a blur of police interviews, security assessments, and the surreal experience of having my quiet suburban home treated as a potential crime scene. Detective Chen explained that Karen had been released on bail pending her court date, despite the prosecutor's objections. Her lawyer convinced the judge that she was a first-time offender with strong community ties, Chen said grimly. What they didn't mention was that she'd apparently spent her one phone call arranging bail and the next 40 minutes ranting to anyone who'd listen about how you'd orchestrated this whole situation to destroy her life. Where is she now? Unknown. She's supposed to check in with her bail supervisor daily, and she's not allowed contact with her children until the CPS investigation is complete. But beyond that, Chen shrugged helplessly. We can't monitor her 24/7 based on one threatening text. Even though she just orchestrated months of illegal activity. Property crime and child endangerment are serious charges, but they don't usually escalate to violent threats. Usually. Chen's emphasis on the last word wasn't reassuring. However, given the content of that message and her mental state when we released her, I'd recommend taking some precautions. Those precautions turned out to be more extensive than I'd expected. Within 2 hours, I had a new security system being installed, motion sensor lights going up around the property, and Detective Chen's direct number programmed into my phone, with instructions to call immediately if I saw any sign of Karen. By sunset, my previously peaceful cul-de-sac looked like a low-security military installation. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to destroy my property, Karen had forced me to turn it into a fortress. Miguel showed up the next morning as promised, along with 2 yards of premium topsoil and a truck full of plants that would have made Sarah weep with joy. Heirloom tomato seedlings, heritage roses, herbs that would fill the evening air with fragrance. Everything from her sketched garden plans, finally ready to take root. You sure about the timing? Miguel asked, eyeing the security cameras and motion detectors. Might be better to wait until this situation settles down. The timing is perfect, I said, and meant it. Sarah waited long enough for this garden. I'm not letting Karen delay it any longer. We worked steadily through the morning, transforming the rectangle of backfilled earth into something that actually resembled the beginning of a garden. Miguel had brought his teenage nephew Carlos to help with the heavy lifting, and the kid had an intuitive understanding of plant spacing that reminded me of Sarah's natural gardening abilities. By noon, we'd planted the memorial rose bush in the center of what had been the deep end, surrounded by a careful arrangement of herbs and vegetables that would provide both beauty and function. It was exactly what Sarah had sketched during those final weeks, when morphine had dulled the pain but not her dreams for our future. I was kneeling beside the rose bush, firming the soil around its roots, when Carlos suddenly stood up straight and pointed toward the street. Mr. Morrison, isn't that the crazy lady? I looked up to see Karen's black SUV parked at the end of my driveway, engine running, windows tinted dark enough to hide the driver. It had been there long enough for the engine heat to create visible distortions in the air above the hood. Miguel, I said quietly, get Carlos behind the truck. You think she's dangerous? Before I could answer, Karen's door opened and she stepped out. The transformation was shocking. The perfectly groomed suburban queen of 3 days ago had been replaced by something that looked like she'd been living rough. Her blonde hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail, her makeup was smeared, and she was wearing the same yoga pants she'd had on during the pool disaster, now stained with what looked like days of accumulated dirt and tears. But it was her eyes that made my blood run cold. They held the fixed intensity of someone who'd crossed the line between anger and genuine instability. James, she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. We need to talk. I stood. Slowly, keeping the freshly planted rose bush between us. Karen, you're not supposed to be here. Your bail conditions, fuck my bail conditions. The profanity sounded strange coming from someone who'd spent years policing neighborhood language standards. Do you see what you've done to me? Do you see what your selfishness has cost? She gestured to herself with both hands, as if her disheveled appearance was evidence of my crimes. I lost my house, James. My children. My husband filed for divorce this morning, did you know that? Served me papers while I was sitting in a goddamn jail cell because of your vindictive pool removal. Karen, I think you need to talk to someone. I tried talking. I tried reasoning. I tried explaining to everyone that you were the problem. That you'd been systematically destroying our neighborhood for months, and nobody would listen. She started walking toward us, her movements sharp and erratic. Miguel positioned himself between her and Carlos while I tried to figure out if she was armed and how quickly I could get everyone to safety. So now I'm done talking, she continued. Done explaining. Done trying to make people understand what you really are. She reached into her jacket pocket, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought she was pulling out a weapon. Instead, she produced a smartphone and held it up like an accusation. Do you know what this is, James? This is justice. This is accountability. This is the truth about what kind of person you really are. The phone was recording. She'd been documenting our confrontation, probably since she'd arrived. I realized with growing alarm that whatever she was planning, she wanted it on video. I want everyone to see, she said, her voice taking on the sing-song quality of someone reciting rehearsed lines. I want the whole world to know that James Morrison destroyed a family because he couldn't handle his own grief like a mature adult. Mrs. Pemberton, Miguel called out, you need to leave this property. Now. She ignored him completely, her attention focused on me with laser intensity. You think you won, don't you? You think because you had the law on your side, because you had permits and documentation, that makes you right. But there are higher laws than municipal codes, James. There are moral laws. Karmic laws. Laws that say when you destroy innocent people, the universe finds a way to balance the scales. She was moving closer, the phone still recording, her free hand gesticulating wildly. My children are in foster care because of you. My marriage is over because of you. My home, the home I spent 5 years making perfect, is condemned because of you. And why? Because you were too selfish and self-pitying to maintain your property like a civilized human being. Karen, that's not, don't interrupt me. The sudden volume made all of us jump. I'm making a statement for posterity. Future generations need to understand what happens when entitled widowers decide that their grief gives them license to destroy other people's lives. I could see Miguel slowly reaching for his phone, probably calling 911. Carlos was already behind the truck, smart enough to recognize genuine danger when he saw it. Do you want to know what rock bottom feels like, James? Do you want to know what it's like to lose everything you've worked for because of one person's vindictive selfishness? She was close enough now that I could see the broken blood vessels in her eyes, the way her hands were shaking with either adrenaline or stimulants or pure psychological breakdown. Because you're about to find out. That's when I noticed the smell, gasoline. strong enough to make my eyes water, growing stronger as she approached. I looked down and saw that her yoga pants were soaked with something that definitely wasn't water. "Karen," I said as calmly as I could manage, "you're covered in gasoline." She smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness I'd seen from her in days. "Smart man. I knew you weren't as stupid as you were cruel." She reached into her other pocket and pulled out a disposable lighter. "Do you know how long it takes to burn down a memorial garden? How long it takes to turn someone's sentimental tribute into ash and regret?" "Put the lighter down." "I don't think so. I think it's time you experienced some real loss. Not the natural, inevitable loss of a wife to cancer, that's just life, James. Random biology. But the deliberate, calculated loss of something you care about. That's justice." She flicked the lighter, producing a small flame that danced in the breeze. "My children thought they were helping me solve a problem. Do you know what that feels like? To realize that your kids have more integrity than you do. That they were willing to crawl through tunnels in the dark because they believed their mother was trying to fix something broken." The flame wavered, but held. "They are not speaking to me, James. Mason and Madison, my babies, they won't even take my calls. The social worker says they've been telling everyone that I lied to them, that I used them. My own children think I'm a monster because of what you forced me to."